Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. By way of introduction, my name is Ravi Naidu, and I'm the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Cooperative Research Center for Contamination Assessment and Remediation of the Environment, and also a university professor with the University of Newcastle. My lecture today focuses on cleaning up the earth, and the story that I'm going to take you through is what focuses on the work that I have done for the last 30 years. And that work has all been about contaminants in the environment, the impact that it can have on environment and human health, and what we need to do to clean up our environment. But first, I just want all of us to acknowledge that what we call contaminants in certain low doses is what we need as well. For example, the metals like lead, copper, nickel, for instance, all of these, when we're mining these, and the gold as well for that matter, what we're mining, we're all put to good use. And for that matter, organic contaminant, PFAS, for instance, and that was all synthesized for us to be able to manage fire and minimize risk to both environment and human health. And so when managed well in low doses, these do not pose any risk. Where the challenge with these chemical compounds or elements is when these are generated in excess amounts and these get into the environment accidentally, for instance, through spillages, these can pose a significant risk such that when exposed over a long period, it can lead to death as well, fatalities, for instance. So in this presentation, a very brief introduction on chemical pollutants in the environment, the impact that it can have on human health, environmental health, the risk, and the great challenge that we are confronted with from cleanup of the earth perspective. And based on all these, a brief concluding comments as well. I would like to start my presentation by taking you through this outstanding publication by Rockstrom and his co-authors in Nature. In this presentation, these researchers, they identified 10 planetary boundaries. And they said that one of the 10 planetary boundaries, for humanity's sake, we ought not to transgress. And that planetary boundary is chemical pollution. And if you look at chemical pollution, as they said, it's not yet quantified, but it has major implications to the other 9 planetary boundaries. I didn't circle biodiversity, but yes, it does have implications to that as well. Pollutants impact ozone, are responsible for, can be linked to ozone depletion, for instance. Pollution impact biogeochemical cycle and therefore biodiversity and the other planetary boundaries as well. But what's more striking as well is that these authors, they said that chemical contamination is equivalent or greater significance with climate change, something that we often forget. We focus on climate change, we forget that chemical pollution is also posing significant risk to both environment and human health. Let's look at some of the sources of pollutant. So there are 2 different sources of pollutants. One is point sources. And when you look at point sources, here we are looking at very high concentrations of pollutants that are spread over small areas. And often this could be through accidental spillages of industrial waste, for instance, or at a time when we did not have appropriate legislation, we used to dig and dump these wastes. And that could lead to both soil and groundwater contamination. And often it's quite a challenge to clean these, but because small area, we have cleaned some of these, but not all. As opposed to point source, we have non-point source pollution. And this is low doses of pollutants spread over a large area. And these could be pesticides in the farming area, for example, or cadmium. But you can't clean these by removing contaminants. All we can do is manage these. So Earth is polluted, no matter what country you go to. you will have certain doses of contaminants or pollutants present. And small countries like Pacific Island countries, you will have a landfill site, for instance. There'll be emissions as well. Larger countries, you'll have a whole lot of other sorts of pollutants. Industries emitting, as we see here in this slide. Many vehicles, large areas with pesticide pollutions, for example, ships, oil spills, electronic waste. So no matter which direction you see, in large countries, you see many, many sources of pollutants. Smaller countries, to some extent, not as many sources, but we do see pollutants. And many of these can be found in soils. These are human-made pollutants. And here is just an example of some that I have listed here. Most, if not all of these can be found in soils, from arsenic, other inorganic contaminants, to organic contaminants that includes pesticides, and of late PFAS as well. This is just a little drop given the enormous number of known and unknown chemicals that we are confronted with in our environment. Now, moving from these different pollutants, contaminants, to the number of potentially contaminated sites. This was published in 2005, except for the last row here on Asia region. You can see in the second column that we have millions, in total millions of potentially contaminated sites. I haven't included Eastern Europe, there's another 3 million there, and we are spending billions of dollars trying to clean up these contaminated sites, billions of dollars. And to clean these all up, a US estimate suggests $650 billion over 30 to 35 years. I have seen a recent article that says up to $4 to $4.5 trillion. And take that into consideration, planet, the Earth, the number of contaminated sites, you are looking at many trillions of dollars to clean up these contaminated sites. And even though we've been cleaning for more than 50 years, less than 10% of the contaminated sites have been cleaned. And this is largely because of the complex, heterogeneous nature of the environment that we are dealing with, and also technologies, they're there, but they're not those that can clean environment overnight. And moving from point source to non-point source, and this is a figure from Google, it shows that no matter what country you look at, if you look at the green bar charts, you have very large areas of land that have pollutants or contaminants associated with them. And to clean these broadacre farms is quite a challenge. You can't remove the soil, you can't extract. All we can do, like we do for cadmium, is manage these in the soil so that they don't get into plants. Earth is therefore already polluted by both geogenic processes and anthropogenic activities. The main pollutants are the chemicals used in industry or produced as byproducts. And we know that there are more than 144,000 human-made chemicals. And look, we are also releasing more than 2,000 new chemicals every year. And this is something that you see from the US Department of Health publication. And according to Julian Cribb, his latest book, we are generating more than 250 gigatons of human emissions. I'm not going to go into the details of these, but if you look at what you have there, is the chemicals that we have, pesticides, nutrients, e-waste, and all the carbon dioxide that we generate through mining activities, and of course the topsoil as well. And all of these chemicals, they impact our critical zone. Critical zone is what is defined as the zone between the top of the tree to groundwater. And if you take a cross section of this, just into the soils, you have the surface soil, and you have the subsurface soil, and then you have the subsurface again, which has groundwater. And if you have rain, for instance, if you have contaminants present in the soil through accidental spillage, for instance, if you have rain, these will leach into subsurface soils, and once it gets into groundwater, the groundwater is moving, and therefore it can carry pollutants from the source zone and can be into oceans or riverine systems as well. And if you have volatiles, that will come into air, and you can breed that. And if it is a large area, you're growing crops from soil into crops as well. So here we are looking at a critical zone which also supports the ecosystem processes, and therefore it can impact ecosystem services as well. As well. Looking at the impact of contaminants, as I've been talking about both human health as well as environmental health, and I talked about critical zone. Critical zone is all about natural capital. Natural capital is the one which underpins ecosystem services. And when you look at ecosystem services, there are beneficial flows of goods between natural capital stocks or stocks and human. And a paper published in Nature in 1997 lists 17 ecosystem services. I won't go into details of these, but every one of these ecosystem services would involve soil. Imagine you contaminate your soil. By contaminating your soil, you are impacting all the biogeochemical cycles, and in doing so, you're impacting ecosystem services. And GDP, which worth about total GDP is about $18 trillion, that's impacted as well. So all in all, contaminants present in the agricultural environment and also in the urban environment, they are and can continue to impact our ecosystem services. And how do they impact human? And there is a food chain. So volatile, the link, you can inhale that. Soil, children playing can ingest that through crops that we grow, through fodder, animal, groundwater to animal, and also groundwater, soil to human. And it's all about food security, yield, and also crop quality. So we are confronted with a massive, massive challenge, not just in one country, globally as well. Along with contaminated soil, we have to deal with dust, whether it's mining, for instance, whether vehicles, emissions from there, the dust particles, they can all have associated contaminants as well. And any contaminant that leaches, it can pollute water and groundwater as well. Just focusing on dust, air pollution, WHO report in 2014 sums up really well. A 2012 work that they did demonstrates that 7 million premature deaths could be linked to air pollution, 1 in 8 of total global deaths. This is more than double previous estimates. And so air pollution is now the world's largest single environmental human health. Reducing air pollution could save millions of lives. And when you compare the number of people who die from exposure to pollutants against all the other illnesses that we have, just direct chemical exposure as opposed to air pollution kills 4.9 million people every year. That's far more than HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, traffic accidents, malaria. And add to that number who die from dust, air pollution, that makes it $12 million per year as well. So where do we escape? Thermal exposures can get into us, inhalation, we inhale dust and through air, odor exposures, through food and other associated material that you intake. It gets accumulated into our system through human milk, from human milk into babies, and also from mother to fetus or to amniotic fluid as well. So there is no escape when you have pollutants in the air. This is just an example of one contaminant. You have many other contaminants as well. An excellent paper by Harvard group shows that brain development conditions affect millions of children worldwide. Won't go into the details of all of this, but they linked these conditions to 5 industrial chemicals. We know all of these: lead, methyl mercury, PCBs, arsenic, and toluene. And more recently, that was 2006, they've added another 6 such chemicals: manganese fluoride, copperophos, dichloro-diphenyltrichloroethane, tetrachloroethylene, and polypropylethylene, polybrominated diphenyl ethers as well. There are many more that remain undiscovered as well, and something that we need to focus on. And these are just a couple of examples. One where you have a muscle, bivalve, for instance, exposed to tributyl tin, and here the male organ is coming out of its head. The second one is arsenic exposure, low doses over a sustained period, for instance. And there are many examples of arsenic fluoride contamination, exposure, and what it does to human health that ultimately leads to death as well. Now, cleanup, the massive challenge we face. If you look at global container sites and pace of remediation, as I said, less than 10% of sites have been remediated. And over time, 5 million, but you add to that Eastern European container sites, 8 to 10 million, and look at the amount, the cost of remediation, 80 to $100 billion per annum, and yet we are not remediating as fast as we would like to. Most of the money is being spent by developed nations. Developing nations do not have financial resources, but also they do not have the capacity, human capacity. So in this figure, if I show investment on x-axis, GDP on x-axis, investment on y-axis, and you can see the focus here. Developing nations don't have that much money to spend. Developed nations spend a lot, but still cleanup is not as fast as you'd like it to be. And besides, human capacity in developing nations, trained people, is not as many. And therefore, there's a need for us to focus on both capacity as well as how do we provide support for them to clean environment. Now, what do we need? Firstly, regulation. Second, technology, finance, capacity, and stakeholder support. Regulation is important, both the introduction of chemicals, at the same time, the endpoints for remediation. Appropriate technologies, do we have them, cost-effective ones? Where do we get finance from, and how do we build capacity to help developing nations and other nations to cope with remediation as well? Why regulation is failing? 19 out of 144,000 chemicals have only been banned thus far. We release more than 2,000 every year, and as according to UNEP, only many new chemicals are not tested for human and environmental safety. Replacing old chemicals with new ones still brings new problems. And then companies shift production of banned chemicals, pesticides, from developed nations where it's banned to poorly regulated countries as well, which is not a help. It continues to deliver those chemicals that we don't want and keep spreading it beyond their country as well. The cleanup technologies that we have, quite a few researchers are coming up with these technologies. Where do we fail? Researchers publish papers, but these do not go from publications out into the field. And that's something that we need to look at. What resources can we put in place such that green, cost-effective technologies that are published by researchers are converted from lab out into the field, and there needs to be collaboration with practitioners and industries as well. We need to build capacity in each country, and if we have that, then we could have some really new cost-effective technology innovations which are ready or good for the developing countries as well. And of course, policy consideration comes into picture as well. One goes through these, but I can say that yes, we have quite a few, but we still need to do quite a lot more to come up with those cost-effective technologies. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we have more than 5 million potentially contaminated sites. Chemical pollutant in soil is not a single entity. It's present in mixtures and is linked to water and air. Our health burden is higher than for any other casualty. The impact of chemical pollutant is 5 times as large as our climate impact. The regulations could play a central role in managing introduction of new chemicals in the environment. We do believe that there is a need for an accord like Paris climate change, but for soil pollutants. A global initiative is needed, and to this end, in 2013, I launched Global Contamination Assessment and Remediation Enterprise, Global Care. Not a company to make money, but networking, getting people together who can work together to help minimize the exposure of humans in the Earth's biosphere to anthropogenic chemical contamination from all sources. My email, if you could write, ravi.naidu@crccare.com. We welcome companies, welcome researchers to join this network so we can jointly make an impact that helps us clean up our planet. Let's seal the deal We've already started. Have you? If not, want you to join us. And Global K Action, this is what we have been doing. We are looking forward to you helping us deliver some, if not all of these. With that, I will say thank you very much for your attention. I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.